Some people were starting to think it was a conspiracy. Why are they waiting so long to get to But again, to set the premise of the series, we have been talking about the first meaning, those who embraced Islam by order, speaking about the struggle as it was unfolding and the capacity of these companions in regards to their embracing Islam, and of course with his Islam completely changes the course of history forever. So this is the most consequential conversion to Islam in the history of Islam after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself receiving revelation. The consequences of his shahada changed the entire course. A page is turned in the seerah books of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we understand something new about this community that laid the foundation for us to benefit from until today. And of course is the last of the four in terms of the order of embracing Islam, and the last of the prominence, Muhajiri, the prominent people of Mecca, prominent in regards to the seerah books, the names that are well known to us when you look at the order of people embracing Islam, is the last of the group of Muhajirin as we know them, who embraces Islam and who changes the way that Islam functions in the world as a community of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And of course he is very beloved for good reason, and I'll say this, subhanallah, that the love that people have for it reminds me first and foremost of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that if Allah loves someone he calls Jibril, and he says, I love this person, so Jibril loves this person. And by the way, we'll see that in the initial conversion of Jibril loves the person, and Islam calls out to Allah, to the inhabitants of the heavens, and says that Allah loves this person, so all of the inhabitants of the heavens love that person as well. And then Allah allows that to translate into the love of the righteous for that person on earth. The love that the Muslims have for is divine. It is something that Allah has put in our hearts, that when we hear his name, there's a sense of pride, a sense of attachment. When you're reading any story of the seerah, as soon as you hear his name come in, you know that things are about to get interesting, right? You know that this part of the story is going to get interesting, and you're ready to hear what's next. You read about the history of the system that he established, the justice of and it is nothing but love that comes in the hearts of the Muslims. So let's talk about him, and I know that many of us have heard the story of his conversion, and I want to emphasize from the start, inshallah ta'ala, that if you go back and look at some of the biographies that we covered of people that maybe were not as well known to you, we will start to connect a few more dots, inshallah, and we'll talk about some points of context that aren't typically mentioned in a lecture about the conversion of America. So there will be tidbits that I want you to hang on to, and hopefully this will force you to go back and watch some of the lectures that it may have been some time of people that we cover, and their stories are deeply interconnected with So his name is we covered someone early on in the series whose name is connected to that. Who do you hear? One of the first people that we covered in this series was the man who the Prophet said, when we come on the day of judgment, may Allah make us amongst those lined up behind our Prophet sallallahu alaihi, and we see the nations lined up behind their prophets. This man will be standing alone, music, because he believed and he acted upon his belief before the Prophet sallallahu, who received revelation, and he was persecuted for that. So basically he had the journey of a Sahabi without ever getting to be a real Sahabi, because he did not live to see the Prophet receive revelation. This is the cousin of his first cousin in fact, and as we know, his greatest persecutor was the father of was the one that would beat Zayd when Zayd would speak in front of the Kaaba about following the religion of Ibrahim Salam and about the importance of monotheism. Al Khattab said, get this out of here. Why, this is distracting Quraysh, this is harming our idols, this is an insult to our culture, it's an insult to our forefathers. And he would be the one that would beat Zayd so much that Zayd could no longer bear to come out and live in Mecca. So the father of and that's the father's tribe, and is a small tribe, tribe of Quraysh, so they are Qurashi, but they are not one of the large tribes, a very small tribe from Quraysh, of course. Just to describe him physically, what do you think when you hear the name of strength? Big and strong, right? So big that when he would ride on an animal, his feet would touch the ground sometimes because of how strong he was, how big he was, so big that when he walked on the road, the kids would run away because they would be afraid of him, even if he meant no harm. Everything about him represents a Paul Bunyan like physical stature, right? Someone who was just absolutely huge, so description, extremely tall, very strong, okay. He had a reddish skin color, meaning he was fair-skinned. He had a white color with a reddish hint to it, but then you'll find sometimes he's described as the opposite, and they say because in the year of the famine abstained from food, and because of his abstaining particularly from meat, that he actually changed colors, subhanallah. You actually find that his color changed in the midst of that period of his life. So he's described as both he had very big deep-set eyes. You looked at his eyes, and they were very big, and they were deep-set. They stood out from his face, from his facial features, large hands, a large feet, a deep voice. One of the funny narrations that I came across is that one time the Imam Allah has a narration that one time there was a barber that was cutting Omar's hair and just spoke to tell him something, and he fainted because he got afraid because of how deep the voice of humor was. So the depth of the voice of Omar was that you could hear him from far away, and his voice would echo from its depth. So he had a deep voice. The ground under him would tremble. His voice would cause the environment around him to tremble. And this is a something that is not looked down upon in the deen when you look at his strength. And this is of course from the beauty of Prophet Sallallahu, who is that he put everyone on a track when they became Muslim that fit their strengths, and that was for their benefit, and for the benefit of the community. He would not try to tame when he became Muslim, but he directed Omar's his energy and his strength towards that which was righteous and that which was good. And there's a narration here from about the character of the deen in that sense. One time our mother saw a group of men walking very slow, bent over, bad posture like me, right, just kind of like walking like this, and said, what's going on with these guys? What is it with them? They said, there's one narration, one says, so they're ascetics, they're people who have abstained from the dunya. They are reciters, Quran, meaning they recite at night. They recite all night, they don't sleep at night. So mashallah, they don't eat, they don't drink, they're very weak, they're very pious, they're very humble. And Allah, his response was, don't you know, don't do this to our religion, don't kill our deen for us, don't bring this type of behavior to our deen. And she said, the master of all those who would recite at night, no one prayed more than Omar, no one was more humble than when he walked fast. You would not know from his piety and his asceticism, you wouldn't see him walking like, why are you walking so slow? My back hurts, I've been praying PM all night, it's been rough with all the tahajjud, my knees hurt from tahajjud. Noam would walk very fast. Music, when he spoke, he made sure everyone heard him. He didn't have a low voice, he wasn't arrogant, but his voice was confidence. That's who he was, that was the character of deen in When he spoke authoritatively, he was not afraid to project his voice. And when he hit hard. There was no weakness in the punch or the hit of Islam did not do away with any of that with humor. But now when he walked, he did not walk with personal pride. He walked out of the confidence, and for the sake of Allah, he spoke. In one narration, when he fed generously, right. He didn't hold back anything of his wealth when he spent for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa with Adam. So we move on because when you think of the Islam of humor, you think of an older person, right, one of the leaders of Quraysh in terms of his status, and reality is that he was in his mid-20s, okay, so he was about 24 years old when the Prophet Sallallahu, who received revelation even down to 21 years old. And when we're looking at some of these Sahaba that embraced Islam at 17, 18, 19 years old, was in his early 20s, and was a camel herder for his father. And a trader as well. So we said he was born in Mecca and Banu Adi. Despite being a small clan, they used to participate in some of the arbitration and some of the reparations when there were issues amongst the different tribes of Quraysh. His mother, her name was Music, and she was from the tribe of Banu Mazam, which is the tribe of Abu Jahl, the tribe of Abu Jahl, the tribe of Khalid. And this is significance because Hamtama was the niece of Abu Jahl. So Abu Dhabi was actually Omar's uncle, okay, and he would refer to him as such, and Abu Jahad would refer to him as his nephew because of his mother. So he's got his foot in both of these tribes in Banu, small but powerful, not necessarily influential, respected. They kind of have their space carved out, and then his foot as well in the door when it comes to Banu. Now his father was unknown for one thing and one thing only which is very significant harshness, extremely harsh man, ruthless, he was ruthless with his family, he was ruthless with the strangers, he was ruthless with everybody around him. And this shows up in multiple narrations. First and foremost from himself used to come to the valley on the outskirts of Mecca, and he would look out, and he would say, La ilaha, the most high exalting Allah subhanahu ta'ala, the one who gives to whom he wills when he wills. And he said, I remember when I used to work in these valleys, and herd sheep and camels for my father, and for my uncles, and for my aunts. And my father was so rough, he was ruthless, he would exhaust me if I did my work right, and he would beat me if I did my work wrong. And he says, in different narrations, he says that my father used to overwork me, and he used to be an abusive man with his tongue, and with his hands, subhanallah. Another narration from Abdurrahman, he said that mentioned that he would make me herd the sheep, and he would make me gather the firewood. But every time he mentions he was an abusive man, so who grew up with a hatred of sorts for his father, because his father used to beat him severely, and he used to beat others as we see, so he was known for his roughness, his harshness, and this was something that he himself experienced first, and this was something that Zayd ibn Abraham Nafal, of course, experienced as well now. What we keep on hearing, though, is that also took from this a sense of humility, that I was just someone that used to herd sheep and camels. And so there are so many different narrations of reflecting on his time as a sheep herder and as a camel herder, and we take first and foremost that you don't need to be resigned to the weaknesses of your parents or circumstances. Could have easily been a cruel man for the rest of his life, and justified that by saying what my father was cruel with me. I grew up in cruel circumstances. Instead, we'll see take a particular affinity towards Radha, towards justice. He did not want to inherit the cruelty of his father and that son, so when would show his anger, especially after Islam, it was injustice, and it was for righteous causes, and it did not transgress into oppression. However, when it comes to his being a shepherd, multiple times where would call to attention that he used to just be a shepherd to himself and to his society, and this is throughout Islam, who says that one time he stood up on the member, and he said, call the Adam, this is when he was the Caliph now, when you call the Athan outside of Salah time, what does that indicate? Maybe war, we're under siege, an army has come, it's something extremely important. So there is something that requires us to call the adhan now, call the people to prayer now. So they all gather to hear what has to say. He said, Bismath Rasulullah, so he started off in the name of Allah, and with the praise of Allah subhanahu ta'ala and salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, my name is Umar, used to be called Umair, which is little Umar, and I used to be a barefoot shepherd that would tend to the sheep of my father and of my aunts from Banu Mazam, and they would give me just a handful of dates that would suffice me for the day. It just gets down, I've been out for the Allah, and who said did you really just call all the people for this? And I noticed something in myself. I was receiving the wealth coming from all over the world, because Islam had spread under and my nefs myself spoke to me, and said, look at you, Masha Allah self, right, you're Amir al, the leader of the believers, you are this, you are that. So he said, I wanted to teach my nephew lesson. So this was me talking down my nups, putting my naps back in its place. Another narration, remember, we talked about last week, versus a woman, an elderly woman in the streets of Mecca or Medina at that time, and she calls out to Omar, and she says he's the leader of the Muslims. She says, little Umar, I remember when he used to be barefoot and tending to the sheep and to the shepherds and to the camels as a shepherd in Mecca, in the valleys of Mecca. So fear Allah subhanahu ta'ala with those who are now under your care. And would break down crying, and they said to this old woman, they said, calm down, why are you doing this to Amir Muhammad? And they're both trying to calm her down, and they're telling why are you so moved by this elderly woman? Why don't you just tell her to stop? Why don't you send her away? Why are you so humbled when she speaks? He says, who that is the woman who Allah heard from above 7 heavens, the woman who came pleading to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. If Allah heard her above 7 heavens, you want me to not hear her? So he was always humbled by his background and one specific thing. And then I'll move on from this, inshallah ta'ala. He says that he used to tend to the sheep of his aunts from Zoom as well, so it wasn't just his father, but also his aunts from Al-Mazam, which was the tribe of, as we said, Abu Jahad, and of course, the gem of this, that the scholars mentioned, is that the prophets were shepherds. The prophet Saws said that all of the prophets were shepherds, and that there are certain leadership qualities that come out of being a shepherd, right, caring for the flock. So had that experience as a young man growing up of taking care of the flock, and that is very much needed when you become in charge of a group of people, to know how to take care of the flock, because people are very much so like the flock, right? They go with the flow, and you have to, care for them, and be tender with them, and bring them along and make sure that you exhibit the right behavior to keep them together, and to protect them from their outside enemies. So anyway, that is his profession as a young man. Now, what he did as he grew up was he started to supplement his income through different ways. One of them is that who would enter into wrestling competitions, so he used to fight, and he would enter into the wrestling competitions of his time, and was known to not lose any type of battle, so he was known for his strength, and he would overcome people in fighting and wrestling, and he would earn money in that way. Another thing that did, which is significant, is that he learned how to read and write in his teenage years, which was very rare amongst Quraysh. Sometimes you think about you think maybe someone who's brute, who's ignorant, kind of impulsive, doesn't have high intelligence. That's kind of the portrayal, right, of a person who jumps, and was extremely intelligent, very, very learned, smart, and he was only they said, among 17 people from Quraysh that had embraced Islam, that knew how to read. He knew poetry, and he developed an understanding of the poetry at the time. And guess what? Because of just how competitive he was, what did he basically entered into the diss battles of his time, which means that he would use poetry to insult people, and they would insult back, and he would basically out poetry you and defeat you in poetry, and he'd make money off of that too. So he would out wrestle, he would out poetry you. He knew how to defeat you with his strength, and with his speech he just knew how to overcome people in every way. The only thing that he was not so successful at was being a merchant, buying and selling. They said he wasn't the best merchant. He did go out on trade routes. He went to Rome, and he went to Persia, by the way, as a kid. So he went out, and he saw the world in the various trade routes, but he wasn't necessarily successful in his trade. So what does he attain amongst Quraysh, as well with his skill set? He was known as the Saphir of Quraysh. He was the ambassador of Quraysh. He would defend Quraysh against everyone else. How? When there was any type of poetry, when there was any type of competition amongst the tribes, when the outsiders came to Mecca, was basically the flag bearer of Quraysh. He would go out, and he would boast about Quraysh's superiority over everybody else. Most people would boast about the superiority of their specific tribes, would defend all of. Quraysh saw him as their spokesperson to address the outsider or the insider about the superiority of Quraysh, and of course, combined both being intelligent and intimidating, right? So he combined the two things that would be necessary for that role, and everybody loved him as a result of that. Now let's continue onwards, inshallah. Some of the context when we come into Islam. We said that his uncle is Abu Jahl, his mother's tribe is Banu Mazam, would also play a role in some of the harassment of the early Muslims. He just really didn't like Islam. He did not like the Prophet ﷺ's message. He did not like what he saw as a disruption to society being together now. There's something really important here about that distinguishes him from Abuja in this regard. Feared for losing his edge, or losing the edge of the tribe, that the tribe would lose some ground. Banu Mazam would lose some ground to Banu Hashim. Banu Mazam, being a sub-tribe, had to maintain superiority in Mecca, and that's why he didn't want to give the Prophet Salah Islam any type of room to breathe or to preach. He did not want Banu Hashim to gain leverage over Banu, did not care about his tribe, he cared about his people as a whole, he cared about society as a whole. And so this is something that might be a little bit hard for some of us to appreciate on a first reading of, that his objection to Islam actually came from a pretty noble place. It was not ego, it was not, well, he's the child of this person, and I'm the child of that person. It was, this person is dividing our families, this person is weakening us as a society because of all of the division that's being caused, and because of that our enemies are making a mockery of us, our idols are insulted, our forefathers are insulted. Realize when he used to defend Quraysh, he had to defend all of their culture, all of their religious practices, everything, and here Muhammad's message is splitting them apart. So he did not like the disruptiveness of Islam more than anything else. What is this that has come between us as tribes and Mecca, and is disrupting us? And that was the source of his persecution, okay, of the Muslims, which is very different from Abu Jahl, who acts from a place of pure ego, and that I should be the one in charge. And if we had a prophet, he should be from Banu Zoom, and we can never give Banu any leverage over us. And so I'm going to turn all of society against these people and torture them so that my tribe can have superiority. There's a difference between the two motivations in that regard. However, at the end of the day, the two biggest people in Mecca from a size perspective were Abu Jahl and and they are persecuting Muslims. Omar not, but still he is amongst the persecutors now. Before even embraces Islam from his family, we know that his sister Fatima bint Al Khattab embraced Islam. Fatima bint Al Khattab embraced Islam, and she was the wife of Said ibn Zayd. May Allah be pleased with them both. All right, so Fatima precedes him in Islam. We have a feeling that his wife, whose name we mentioned last week, and you want to remember Zainab bint Madharun, the sister of Uthman ibn Narun, Zainab bint Madhar, we have a feeling that she also embraced Islam prior to the Allah that she embraced Islam. Zainab had embraced Islam, did not tell that she embraced Islam, and then there is an older brother of This is a very interesting man, subhanallah, but his personality very quiet, very much isolated from society. Subhanallah, sometimes you look at your kids, and it's like how are they brother and sister? Right, they have such different personalities. Zayd was very quiet, not very involved in the affairs of Quraysh, but Islam appealed to him right away, and he embraced Islam, and he embraced it secretly, and the only thing we know about Zayd is his embracing Islam, and then his death, subhanallah, nothing in between. Like he embraced Islam, quietly stayed around the Prophet as he is from amongst the firsts, even before But we can't do a biography about him, because there's so little about him. Was also very tall like and you know someone that could have been very influential in society, but did not take that role, and he surpassed Omar in Islam, and he surpassed music in martyrdom. Zayd died in the battle of Yamama against Musaddam and Kadab. He was martyred fighting against the Muslim Al-Qaeda, and who of course fought in that battle alongside Zayd. He came to Zayd at the battlefield, and there was a strong scent of musk from the body of Zayd. The wind was blowing, and you just smelled the musk from his body, the martyr Zayd, and you beat me to Islam, and then you beat me to martyrdom. Subhanallah, what a man. You know this is Omar's brother. Don't hear much about him in the background, but he preceded Omar to Islam, and he preceded to and when the wind used to blow, he used to say, I can still smell this, the scent of Zayd like the wind, would remind him of the musk from the body of his brother, who died shahid in the battle of Yama. So those are that. Is his brother, that is his sister, that both embraced Islam before him. Now let's talk about his marriages really quick. We mentioned Zainab bin Smith, who was the mother of Abdullah ibn, and the mother of Hafsa. May Allah be pleased with them. So an amazing woman to have raised those kids, all right. He also would marry at some point Attika bint Zayd ibn Ahmed Naif, so he married the daughter of a Zayd abnormal who was also the sister of Seed Benz. He also would marry at some point the daughter of Arif, the granddaughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he married her because he wanted a connection to the Prophet he wanted to have that shared lineage of albeit with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that regard. And he also married who was the widow of Ikrama ibn Abi Jahl. Of course, the son of Abu Jahl would become Muslim and would die as a martyr. He was martyred, married his widow as well. So these are some of the spouses of throughout his life. So what's the story of him becoming Muslim? Some of this you've heard, I'm sure some of it you have not, but let's sort of break it down how Allah was putting Islam in front of time and time again, and how he was different. The first narration is from a woman by the name of Abdullah bint Abi Hathma Abdullah. She was one of the persecuted Muslims, and she was one of those who escaped with her husband to Habasha, to Abyssinia, because of the harshness of the persecution. She describes this incident. She says that we used to be abused by society, and he was amongst those who were harshest on us for being Muslim. And then one day me and my husband, we were getting ready to go to Abyssinia. My husband left to go do something. And I was the only one in front of my house, and I was getting our luggage ready so that we could make the migration. So he rides by, and he looks to me, and he says, "Where are you going?" So she said, I responded in anger to him, "Right, like you know what, I'm sick of you, we've had enough of you." So she said to him that we are searching throughout the land of Allah, so that we will no longer be harmed for worshipping Allah, because you and your people have made it too hard for us to live in this land. Was hurt, and he puts his head down, and he says, "May Allah be with you and your husband," and he rides off. That was not the answer she was expecting. She was expecting Allah, I know, to throw a curse word back, maybe hit or spit her in her direction. That was not what she was expecting from So she said he looked hurt. I saw this. These are her words, a softness from him that I never saw before. I never saw the softness from came home, and I said to him, "You should have seen Omar, his softness and his sadness for us, when I told him that we are leaving." So she said, looked at me. My husband looked at me, and said, like, "Let's make sure we're talking about the same Omar here, Ibn." I said, "Yeah, and he laughed, and he said, "So you think he's going to become Muslim?" And Abdullah said, "Yeah, maybe," and he was the one that said the famous words, "The hammer of Al-Khat, the donkey of Al-Khattab, will become the donkey of his father, will become Muslim before him. You have hope in him." You crazy, right? Subhanallah, I mean. And if that's not a lesson in never X someone out, pass a judgment on them, that they're done as long as their soul is still in their body. You never know who's going to embrace Islam. You never know who has hope. This is the story, this man, who's a noble Sahabi, one of those that migrated to Habsha, thought Umayyah. Right, no way, there's no tense, he has no redeeming quality. He's harsh, he's rude, he's abusive, no good in And here we are talking about today, one of the greatest Muslims to ever walk the face of the earth. So that's the first thing. The second one is an incident that's not as well known, and it's going to the second half of this narration. He says that I was once in front of the Kaaba, and a man brought his animal, and he slaughtered his animal, so he was sacrificing to the idols. And he said then, a person or something, being that we could not see an unseen being screamed at him. I've never heard a scream as loud as the shout at that man. So is in front of the Kaaba, and he's watching this man come to sacrifice an animal to an idol, and he hears a voice yelling at that man. He said, "Interesting, Subhanallah. Words mean, you wicked, an affair has risen amongst you that will be successful, an eloquent man amongst you who says so." He says that those that were around, they basically got up and ran away. They were shocked by what they just heard. He said, "Except for me." He said, "I stood there, and I said, I'm going to see where that voice came from. I want to know what just happens." So he said another time the voice came out and called out, "Yeah." He said that the same thing was said. He said that it happened a third time, and he said, so I stood up. And when I stood up, I heard a few days later that a man had come out amongst us claiming prophethood. So he said this was a few days before the prophet saw some claim prophethood, that this incident happened around the Kaaba. And he said, I witnessed that incident as a young man. I didn't make much of it, one of those things I just passed off, and I did not want to know what happened. Now the third narration, which is the most interesting of them all, it's my favorite narration about the psychology of Allah, is putting Islam in front of him where he cannot deny what is happening in front of him, says that I was far away from Islam. I didn't really care for religion. I was driving people away from it. I really had no interest in this deen whatsoever. And he said, and I was addicted to drinking. I used to love to drink, Subhanallah, just like Hamza, Allahu Ta'ala, his weakness in Jariya's weakness in the days of ignorance. He used to drink a lot. He used to drink a lot. So he said, I used to love to drink, and I would gather with people who would drink alcohol. So his social gatherings, his hanging out at night, was people that would get together, and they would drink hammer. So he said, one night I went out. He's 25 years old, by the way, all right, when this is happening, 25 to 27 years old again. Don't think I'm 50-year-old, 60-year-old, no. He's much younger, the Prophet saws, and some of the others in that ranking young man. He said, so one night I went out and I couldn't find any of my drinking buddies. There was no one around to drink. So he said, I went to one person who I know could make the comment, and I thought maybe he'll figure this out. Maybe he'll have something for me. And I went to him, and he had none with him. So I basically didn't have my drinking buddies, nor did I have anything to drink. So he said, I said to myself, I guess I'll go to the cab and make the laugh right, so sort of like religion, as the last option, let me go keep myself busy back. Then that was sort of something that they would do around the idols. What, let me go make the loft. So he said it was late at night, I couldn't find anyone to drink with. He was sober, which was not his normal state, and I went to the Kaaba to make tawaf, and I saw the Prophet, sallallahu who alayhi wasallam, standing by himself praying in front of the Kaaba, subhanallah. The incident, look how specific this is, he said, that the Prophet, sallallahu who alayhi wasallam, used to pray towards what was his Qibla al-Aqsa, so he was praying towards Asham, he was praying towards Jerusalem, and he would put the Kaaba between him and Al-Aqsa, so he wasn't actually praying to the Kaaba sallallahu, who right or in the direction of the Kaaba, he was really praying in the direction of an Aqsa, but the Prophet said sun would situate himself at that time where the Kaaba was between him and Al-Aqsa, so he was praying towards both sallallahu, who alayhi wasallam, and he said, and he was standing right between Yamani, so the Yemeni corner, and the black stone, so he's giving you the exact details of where he was standing in front of the Kaaba, and the Prophet sallallahu, who was there, and he was standing right in front of the Kaaba, okay, so he's not far back from it.